It is the final word. Story time number 232. A slightly sort of hazy, woozy Monday recording, an unusual Monday recording, because we had the weekend, Adam. We had South Africa. We had the World Test Championship, and everything was emotional. Everything was... Focus was there. Attention was there. And now we're going to take our attention all the way back, look at some stories from cricket history. The show brought to you, as always, through this season by Maurice Blackburn, number one plaintiff law firm in Australia, Geoff Lemon and Adam Collins. Down the screen, how are you looking at the world blearily through South African eyes on a Monday morning?
Yeah, well, I mean, since the last ball, I've pretty much worked the whole time, so it doesn't feel too bleary to me. It's just been keeping on. Day 5, when, as you know well, Geoff, when a test match ends in 4, it just means that 5's different types of work. So Monday morning, we roll straight through. Yeah, story time 232. Stan McCabe is the 232, isn't it? That's the famous defining innings of that to start the 1938 Ashes after England made a squillion, and then McCabe was the ring out effort and laid the foundation under that particular Australian fight back, which became a draw, which helped set the tone for the series. So that's what I think 232. I think that going back a long time now, Christian Ryan wrote a piece about McCabe's 232 and often gets spoken of as one of those totemic interwar period innings that helps define that extraordinary passage of the game's history as well. So, yeah, that's a nice reference point there.
It's the one that Bradman's supposed to say. I wish that I could bat like that.
That's it.
As he takes them down. Yeah, the McCabe story intertwined with Bradman in so many ways, including the USA tour that they did, which not everybody thinks about. But when they rolled across the prairies, the North American tour, really. The Canadian steps and then back down through the States, bulking up thousands of runs between them along the way.
Yep.
So that's the 232. This is the situation, the world that we are in, and we might just get straight into it because we can today. It'll be a short and sweet story time. I know we've said that before, but I think statistically we can back this up. We've got a couple of stories today. And then we'll get on with the busy week that we've got ahead with 2 test series looming in a couple of different countries featuring Australia, England, India, West Indies, all of that to come. But Storytime 232, we might as well get underway via the medium of the game of Nerd Pledge. Nerd Pledge is a game we play with nice people on the internet who fund this program. The whole final word operation, really. The reason we're able to get traveling, go where we need to go, is that people decide voluntarily they're going to sign up. They're going to send in an amount, and the amount is going to be tailored to a number that relates to cricket in some way. We have to figure out what it means. Sometimes we get a clue, sometimes we don't. Mel Shawley, a long-time friend and supporter of the show, has sent through incongruously an amount in Australian dollars, although Mel is a resident of the United Kingdom, we know that, $7.10. The last answer involved Gunter's chain. The last time Mel popped up, you might remember it was a long time back, about the measurement that became the measurement of a cricket pitch, the 22 yards. A change of tack, says Mel, for the next one, 7:10, back to the very beginning. What have you got?
Yeah, and look, I thought that was a nice reference to say that Mel's been with us since the very beginning as well, since when Patreon started, when all this Storytime caper started as well, that Mel's been at so many different things that have been significant in the final word community. She's become a close friend of mine, so I'm glad that I'm able to talk about her answer today. Now, the first thing that I thought of when I saw this is maybe it relates to the part of the world that she's from, or where she lives, at least down in Hampshire, but it's not that, because I know we did an answer that related a long time ago for Mel, that related to the outground. Yeah, there was the outground that Hampshire used in Bournemouth, I think, which got a run as well, the Dean Street ground, I think it was called, which is where my mum's from, which isn't in Hampshire, by the way. Bournemouth's in Dorset, but still they used to use it, I think, as a ground at different points in the earlier parts of the club's history. But no, it's not. I don't think it is that, although the first game of first-class cricket in the Cricket Archive database is Hampshire versus England. I love that in Cricket Archive, every first-class scorecard gets a number. I think we're up to 65,000 first class games. That rings a bell. Andrew Sampson.
It's almost Graham Gooch's runs, isn't it?
Yeah, nearing that. Well, maybe I'm confusing that with Gucci's runs, and it's 45,000. Either way, I know that it's a number in the tens of thousands of first class fixtures played from when they identify first class cricket as having started, which has been contentious space over time. But yes, I know Samo and I had the chance to talk about this on a Surrey game recently. We went back and looked at some very old cards, and that's the privilege of working on that stream, actually, is that you get to, lean into various different curiosities. If you can't do that on county cricket commentary, when can you? And I should just say, when speaking of Samo, I just wanted to acknowledge that I've worked and been friends with him for a decade, worked quite closely with him in different projects at different times. And it was just the lovely thing. Today, I didn't realise when I was commentating on the end of the World Test Championship final, which is partly why my voice is still stuffed, that plus fuck all sleep, not because I've been on the piss, I hasten to add. The camera shot picked up Samo behind me, and I've never really seen him display emotion. I mean, I know I'm not suggesting I'm not saying he's emotionally unintelligent guy, just more that like he's reserved. He keeps his he expresses himself in a way that's quite quiet and dignified. And seeing that guttural roar from the back of the box with him pumping his fists and then giving our colleagues a big kiss and a cuddle in the back of the box as those runs were being collected to secure the World Test Championship for South Africa. I know that in yesterday's ep, that chat with Dan Gallen was quite emotional, as you might have imagined. But yeah, that was also seen in the body language of Samo. So I'm just chuffed for him. He described it to me. Well, he said to me before the day's play, he goes, this will be the most, he was joking. He goes, it'll be the best day of my life, cricketing wise. And he went on to tell the story of 1994 when he was on the other side of the ground in the Warner stand when working as the statistician for Afrikaans Radio when they beat England at Lords. And last night I went back and watched the highlights of that test match where Kepler makes a century, Alan Donald takes a fifer, and they thump England by 346 runs. And their commentary position tucked away in the storeroom, in the what was the old Warner stand, basically had them in the toilet. They used the toilet as a commentary facility for the Afrikaans radio, and he told those stories in great detail and the memories of that. And he said that to that point was one of the best things he'd ever seen at Lords, and this overtakes that. And yeah, it was just great to kind of tap into all of this history with him. And yes, I just thought I'd start by acknowledging him, given we had the chance to.
Yeah, I saw him downstairs just afterwards, Andrew Sampson, and he said he was surprised. He told me he was surprised by how strongly he felt about it. He wasn't anticipating to have that response, having watched hundreds and hundreds of test matches and thousands of first class games probably over, and certainly having recorded tens of thousands of them in the statistical work that he's done. So I'm glad he got to have that moment.
So yes, as I say, the link there is that he and I have gone back and looked at this first card ever, but it's not that. What it is, though, is the first test match scorecard. And where we're going to get there is via, I think, perhaps the second most consequential figure in that match. So Bannerman, the first ball, the captain, the performance that laid the foundation, the 165, the retired hurt, the quirk that it remains the highest percentage. That is the name that jumps off the card in test match number one. But if you jump to the other end of it, Tom Kendall was the left-arm bowler who went on to ultimately win the game for Australia in the fourth innings. They needed someone to stand up and stand up.
Yeah, third fifer of the match, but the biggest, the best figures out of it.
Yeah, the one that mattered most. So he was a left-arm bowler of the time. A lot of bowlers of that time get described variously as having bowled medium pace but spin as well and break back balls and cutters. I think he probably bowled leg cutters, is best I can tell from reading the research, because some people describe him as a left-arm wrist spinner. I doubt he was that, but I suspect he ran his fingers down the ball in a way that would bring the ball back to the right-hander as a left-arm bowler. The 45-run victory was secured by him. He was no guarantee to play before the test match, so this is the story that we touched on a few weeks ago in relation to Fred Spofforth and him not playing as a protest to Billy Murdoch not being named as keeper, and Jack Blackham getting that role and Spofforth saying, I'm not going to play, and that had a knock-on effect with various bits of selection where they literally went to club cricket, which is where Kendall played for Richmond. So he was roped in to play for this combination team It was also, I didn't realise this bit, it was played at the MCG. It was originally set to be played at East Melbourne, which was the ground that now sits, well, the best way I can describe it is I think it sits where there's that Jollymont little, that community of houses that sits outside of the MCG, just near the railway tracks. I think that's where the East Melbourne Cricket Ground was, best I can tell. So not in Yarra Park itself, just over the road. It was going to be there. So the backstory of Lillywhite was that he wanted to take a professional team, and Fred Grace wanted to take an amateur team, and Lillywhite won out. So the Fred Grace trip didn't happen, which is partly why WG wasn't in that first test match. We didn't know it was a test match then, but this combined team, and that's why Lillywhite was able to get the MCG, because suddenly it was available. So that's the story as to where the game was played. So last week I gave an answer talking about early wicket keepers, and we referenced the fact that Jack Blackham was a pioneer of being up to the stumps. Before that, oftentimes they perform more a backstop role. Well, so it proved here with the man we're referring to, the bowler we're referring to, Tom Kendall. He got the first stumping in Test cricket because Blackham was up to the stumps. So he stumped Alf Shaw in the second innings. So that's one of the lovely quirks of all of this, that Blackham up to the stumps to the left armour and whipped the bails off, and that started a whole other thing. Some quirks of this game which I wasn't aware of before. Play began at 1:05 p.m. and lunch was taken at 2 p.m.
What?
So they played 55 minutes in the first session. Then I don't know how long they stopped for lunch and tea, but stumps were taken at 5 p.m. So there was only 3 hours and 55 minutes of play on day one.
They probably still got 120 overs.
Yeah, that's it. Wild over rates. They played a little bit more on day two. I think they started at midday. There was 5,000 from memory, 5,000 there day one, 4,000 day two, or maybe the other way around, 10,000 day three, and only 2,000 on day four, which is when the match ended. So I don't intend on going through the whole match, but where it all lands is that England are set 154 to win. And this is where Kendall comes into his own. He didn't get to bowl the first over in the first dig. That was John Hodges, his Richmond teammate, who did so. I had reason to quickly look at John Hodges, and I reminded myself of a story. I did already know that his death date on Cricinfo is still presumed dead. They don't actually list a death date for him. You'd imagine he is dead, given he was born in 1855. But the context here was that he's
hanging out with Brad Pitt.
Well, he was rogue. He was rogue is the sense I get when looking at the brief analysis on John Hodges' life. In 1884, he was arrested for indecent exposure. He didn't get convicted, but it gives us. I mean, I suppose if you're arrested for it in the first place, it probably suggests you're having a fair frolic.
It depends. Yes, it could be that way. It could be ill-advised public urination in front of the cop shop, that sort of thing. Sometimes gets landed with that sort of charge.
I once wrote a character reference for a friend of mine that got done for getting arrested by a cop for pissing in public at a music festival up at Splendour. I think it was Splendour, maybe somewhere else. A very good person who just needed to go to the bathroom.
Sometimes there are moments where there is no other option available.
No, that's right. Anyway. But yeah, he went to South Africa after this later in life, and he was assumed dead in 1933. So some biographies say that he died in 1933, but there's no verification of it. So that was the Hodges story, who made his test debut, obviously, because they all did together, but bowled the first over and the first ball, therefore, in Test cricket for Australia. Funny that someone who bowled the first ball in Test cricket doesn't have a Cricinfo profile. Like last week, we were going into this about those who do and those who don't. The first ball in Test cricket, just by. And by the way, JJ Kelly, we have been invited. Andrew Miller has asked, he saw my social media post about this, and he has invited me to write a Cricinfo profile for Kelly at some point. So I actually thought that I won't do that. What I'll do is I'll defer to Pat Rogers to do that. I think that's more appropriate that Pat were to do that, given his encyclopedic knowledge of that era of Australian cricket. I would rather that he gets the credit for it rather than me basically borrowing from research that he's already done at different points and different things that have been written about him. But we will rectify that. But no Cricinfo for Hodges either. Anyway, back to Garrett's left armers, his opening partner. He did get to bowl the first over in the second dig, and it was actually he and Hodges that made it 154 because they added 29 for the final wicket in the second innings. So they were critical together, being dragged from like club cricket, having had really no experience play for Victoria for their colony. I think in the case of Garrett, he hadn't played for Victoria yet. I think that's how it goes. One or the other hadn't played for Victoria at this point. And yes, from there, Garrett comes into his own, bowls the first over of the second innings. And he went on to bowl 33 unchanged overs to take the stunning figures of 7 for 55. So if for a moment before Spofforth comes along, he has the best figures in Test cricket, which is a nice thing because we always sort of track who at what point had that sort of championship belt with highest individual score and best figures in Test cricket, which is a nice thing to have on his cricketing CV. Brief as it was in some respects, because he didn't get taken to England in 1878, which is a bit of a quirk. He played the second Test match, the one later in the series, which I've gone through in an earlier answer on Story Time, and he actually got the first over ahead of Spofforth. So despite the fact that Spofforth was seen as the great bowler of it wasn't of the country, but the greatest bowler of colonial times, it was Kendall who was given new ball honours and given choice of ends, presumably, ahead of Spofforth, who bowled the second over. He ended up bowling 52.2 overs when taking the first over in that second Test and picked up 4 for 82, then 2 for 24 in the second Test. That included bowling Jupp for 1 and 0, who had top scored for England in the first Test match, which gives a sense of his strike ability, the 7 for, and then a defining.
He's the leading wicket taker in Test cricket for 5 minutes, isn't he? Because
that's right.
I think after that second Test, because he's got 11. I think
Well, he has 14 at 15 after 2. And he doesn't play again. So he ends up only playing 8 first-class games all up. And that's a quirk of him having moved to Tasmania. He went to a job working at the Mercury newspaper, I think on the production side rather than the writing side. And he stayed there until his death in 1924. So when he was age 72, he remained involved in the game as an umpire. He actually remained in the game in lots of different ways. So there's another nice bookending of his career. In 1874, when Grace was in Australia, he knocked him over when playing for Victoria in a tour game. I don't think it was like a first-class game, but it was a game where he picked up Grace. And he did it again in 1892 when playing for Tasmania. So, and that was a first-class fixture, I believe. So, having Grace twice in kind of that reverse Max Walker going from Victoria to Tasmania. He was born in Bedford, where Cookie was schooled as well. I neglected to mention before, and also, and this is the nice kicker at the end of the answer. We're talking about 1877. That was the one season, at least the one confirmed season where he played footy for Carlton. So, in the Blueseum archive, which is excellent, I've looked at that many times over the years. He played somewhere between 26 and 37 games, which hints that he played outside of 1877, but it's all a bit unclear. But it means that he's one of 3 Carlton footballers to have played Test cricket. One of them's Harry Boyle, who was a star with the ball in a similar era and played 12 Test matches. And, of course, George Kulard, who in 1877, the year in question when Kendall absolutely played for Carlton, that was one of 3 times that George Kulard was named the champion of the colony, the great full forward of his time, the man who ended up being crucial to the SCG right in 1879 and played a Test match of his own at the MCG, having umpired a Test match at the MCG as well. So that's a nice link back through to a final word favourite, George Kulard, who we've told the story of many times in our live shows around Australia. It links back through to the man who picked up 7 for 55 in the first Test match and bowled 71 overs, which is why Mel Shawley here at 7.1. Wonderful to have you back on the show with us, Mel.
I've done a whole bunch of further research on George Kulard after the research that you did on him for that for the story that we used on the show, because he features more heavily in the book, the Storytime book that'll be coming out at the end of the year. So there's a lot. I've come around. I was fairly scathing of George Kulard in the live shows, but I think I've come around to be team Kulard. There was a lot of remarkable things that he did in a short life, but he died on Lygon Street, and we've got the address of the place where he died. There's a restaurant next door to that now, so I'm thinking it'd be nice to have a commemorative dinner at some point during the Australian summer for George Kulard at the the place where he left this mortal coil, making his Melbourne Cup predictions and all the rest of it.
Yes, the fat hog that he picked to win the Melbourne Cup and finished dead last on his deathbed and prompted a splurge of betting as he died that weekend of the Melbourne Cup.
He picked the other bits. He picked the winner of the previous, might have been the Oaks or the Derby. He picked the winner of that, and he said he would, and the winner of the Cup, and said he would die before both races, and he did die a week before, and his tip for the Oaks won it. So that was why there was such interest. The first two bits of the prophecy had come true.
Right.
So there's a fair bit going on with George Coulthard. I just looked at the cumulative wickets thing. So yes, Elfshaw after the first test leads it, but Kendall after the second, and then Spofford, Briggs, Turner, Briggs, Lohman, Briggs. Johnny Briggs keeps coming back through.
Yeah.
And then that sort of sequence that we, if pressed, we could probably do by heart with Trumbull, Sid Barnes, Grimmett, Bedser, Statham, Truman, Gibbs, Lilly, Botham, Hadley, Capel-Dev, Courtney Walsh, Murali, Warne, Murali. So it's only changed hands 23 times in history. And what's that, between about 18 different people. There's not many. Course, no one will catch 800.
Yeah, I was going to say, of course, well, it seems improbable now. The only person that could theoretically is Nathan Lyon. And that, every time I say on social media that is a viable chance of happening, people get very, very cross. I mean, it would take something remarkable. He'd have to play to 41 or 42. But, it's when you're talking about what is probable versus what is possible, they are different things. Mm-hmm. It is possible Nathan Lyon could overtake Murali. Everything would need to go right. It's not probable. That seems to anger people in the same way that it angers people when the Australian team lose and we have to go through the whole rigmarole that we have over the weekend about Woke, Pat, Cummins and all this gibber. I just wish the fucking 2 weeks a year cricket fans would just fucking leave us alone sometimes. Like that's what it comes down to. The people who are saying this don't give a fuck about cricket. It's culture warriors. Anyway,
we all know that. It's having your house party gate crashed by unwelcome visitors. I think, given where, I think we could we could sneak in a break.
Yes, we should.
Then we'll have a story from me.
We should. So Maurice Blackburn Lawyers are the principal partner on The Final Word, as you would well know if you've been listening to us for a while. And what they've kindly done is sent through examples of where they have been able to assist people directly, which is a really important part of what they do as a plaintiff law firm. It's where you go to them and say, I have been aggrieved, I need your help, and they work for you on your behalf. So one of their lawyers, Craig, recently assisted a client who was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, and her condition was deteriorating and she was unable to continue working in her ordinary job. But when she tried to claim back her insurance benefit, which was the TPD benefit, which often comes as part of your income protection, the insurer pushed back. They actually alleged that because she'd attended her GP with symptoms before taking out the policy, that they were entitled to cancel the policy, which, I mean, I'm sure that's such an egregious thing that they were doing. But they took on the insurer, both the client and the firm, and Craig, the lawyer, working on behalf of Maurice Blackburn, and they eventually agreed to withdraw those allegations, and they paid her a lump sum benefit of over $300,000, and she's now entitled to a monthly income protection benefit as well, or monthly payments in line with that, rather. So again, this is where you can see a world where if you were unable to work due to injury or illness, and it was presumably one of the more stressful times in your life, if you had some Goliath insurance company refusing to pay out what you're entitled to, I can see a world where that would just be utterly devastating. And this is where Maurice Blackburn, who oftentimes work on a no-win, no-fee basis, step in and fill the breach. So proud as ever to be in association with Maurice Blackburn Lawyers for all the work they do on behalf of hardworking Australians. If you want to learn more about Maurice Blackburn, there is a link in the show notes. There is the ability to learn more about super insurance specifically by just Googling Maurice Blackburn Super Insurance, and that'll provide you all the information you need and point you in the right direction. So we'll be back in a moment on Storytime 232.
It is the final word. It's story time. A note on VPNs that's actually relevant and topical. When I came to London for the World Test Championship, Adam, hopped off at the airport on the morning of the game, and I had an old eSIM that was valid for the UK, so I fired that up, and I was trying to listen in while I was coming to the ground to the first stages of the match, and it kept telling me, you can't do this, you can only access this content inside the UK. And I was like, I am very much inside the UK. Something was awry. So I had to log in to my VPN and change my location to the UK to be able to access the content only available in the UK while in the UK. This is an instance where having a VPN on your phone that costs a couple of bucks a month is a very good option to have.
Yeah, and I'm sure it'll be the experience of many people as they go on their summer holidays over here in the UK. It's sort of that time of year when people are thinking about what they're going to do when the kids finish term and that type of thing. And if you're leaving the country, don't do it without a VPN, especially if you've got little kids, because believe you me, trying to log into things like iPlayer and log into other television that your kids will insist upon watching, once you're in the other country, you are stuffed because it's in a different language oftentimes. So you want to have these things sorted out beforehand, or to make it even easier, so you can keep streaming and not have to worry about clogging up your devices with endless episodes of TV shows, inane TV shows a lot of the time. Make sure you've got your NordVPN sorted out way ahead of time. NordVPN.com/TFW gets you not only a discount, but also it extends the number of months you get for free. And it also keeps you in line for a 30-day money-back guarantee if you don't like the service. But I don't think I've ever heard of anyone who has sought a money-back guarantee on a VPN because these are outstanding. They're incredibly useful. Use them all the time. I'm off to the Caribbean this time next week, and you can be sure that my NordVPN will be getting a mighty workout then.
All right, nordvpn.com/TFW, my number. It comes in from Vikram Ravi. I like this for a couple of reasons. A new pledger, always nice to welcome a new pledger to the fold. $6.42 is the amount. And I like the note that Vikram sent, which you might like to share with our readers.
Yeah, sure, why not?
Listeners.
I'm working backwards. Yeah, listeners in this instance. Unless they're reading the transcript, which they can do. There is a transcript that gets automated these days. I don't really
It's
know
a bit ropey, but I have ambitions to try to fix those retrospectively. I don't know how realistic that is.
Yeah, well, lots of ambition to do various things. I think that the transcripts of Storytime might be one that takes a back seat, but we'll see how we go.
It's definitely on the back burner in terms of priority, but eventually it's on my long-term list.
We might want to get merch sorted or our website sorted or various other things before we worry about AI transcripts. I'm working backwards through Storytime and have made it to 67. Okay.
This is what I love.
Where would have we been in Storytime 67? My pledge joins 3 test-playing brothers, although they're not too interesting on the surface. I'm curious about what you come up with. As you've shown, even ordinary lives with just a little bit of Stardust can make compelling stories. Keep up the great work. Let me take a guess at this. Storytime 67. We formally sanctioned Storytimes in 2019 as their own thing. Well, 2020 is their own thing. I think we did a couple of episodes in.
We kind of did it like test match designation. We did them retrospectively. We decided that some episodes were Storytime after the fact.
Okay. Well, even so, let's say that there would have been only a handful of them in 19, and in 20 we took a while to. We only did them every other week around the time of calling the shots. So I'm going to give it a healthy year and a half. I'm going to say Storytime 67 was in roughly April 2021. How close am I?
Okay. I don't know. I haven't looked it up, but I could.
No, that's okay. I don't require you to do that. I thought it might be in your answer. That's why I wanted to get in first.
67. It's not in my answer, but it is in.
Why don't you do your answer and I'll look it up.
October 24th, 2021.
There you go. A few months off. October 21. What was going on in October 21? Second year of the
24th.
pandemic.
October 24th.
Second year of the pandemic. The Aussie season would have started. It was an Ashes summer, wasn't it? I think there was.
I would have been in Brisbane by then. I think
there was some limited overs games played in Australia before the Ashes. I think. There was a
women's series in Brisbane.
Yes, there was.
New Zealand. That might have been the ones I was commentating, or was that the previous year?
I think they were played. I reckon they were played. The New Zealand games were played around the time of the AFL Grand Final. I reckon they might have played the first one around then. So we're looking at probably a month after that. Yeah, good question. But either way, we would have been making episodes of the show. That much I'm certain of. Anyway, that's in the rear vision mirror. Thankfully, the pandemic, and that's part of the reason why Storytime got the momentum it did, I guess, because we had the space to tell these stories. And here we are many years later. Anyway, crack on here for Vikram Ravi 642.
Okay, so brothers, 3 test-playing brothers we're looking at. So initially I thought I could probably figure them out off the top of my head. The Grace brothers, including WG, who you mentioned. The Hearn brothers, who we've told the story of before, the mad story of 3 of them playing in the one test match, 1 for South Africa, 2 for England. You've got the Muhammad brothers. You've got 4 Muhammad brothers, in fact, who played Test cricket, with Hanif Muhammad the most prominent with all of his records. You've got the Chappell and Hadley triple brothers with their storied stories. You've got the Akmal brothers, who had a lot going on in Pakistan with, spot fixing allegations and suspensions for, we talked about indecent exposure. It was one of them. Was it Umar, who was running around training with the kid off and getting in trouble? Look, I would not say any of those sets of brothers are not interesting. So the clue said not too interesting on the surface. Don't think those qualify. The Curran brothers are current and not hugely compelling, I guess. They're sort of interesting in a cricketing sense, but not a huge amount in terms of personal story. We've still got the tail end of the Mazzacadze brothers as well, crossing over the England-Zimbabwe thing recently, with Ben Curran playing for Zim, because Wellington Mazzacadze is still going around for Zimbabwe, 10 years younger than Hamilton Mazzacadze, who was a much earlier generation in a cricketing sense, but played there. And they had the brother who was not named after a New Zealand city in Shingarai, Mazzacadze, who I wonder if he ever felt left out between Wellington and Hamilton, that he wasn't called Napier Mazzacadze or Hawke's Bay Mazzacadze, I don't know, Otago Mazzacadze. Didn't happen for whatever reason. Don't know what the Mazzacadze family was up to with that sequence. So those were the ones I could think of, but there were a few that I missed. There are some unlikely ones. The Ranatungas, I didn't know this. I don't know if you knew this, that Arjuna Ranatunga had 2 brothers who also played Test cricket for Sri Lanka. Did that ever ping your radar?
No, it didn't actually. I mean, it's probably just before my time where it would have. I'm assuming they would have played in the 80s rather than the 90s.
Yeah, it's just interesting that he's so prominent in an Australian consciousness of cricket. Ranatunga is a big figure. But the brothers, Sanjeeva played 9 tests, Dhamika played 2 tests. They had another brother, Nishanta, who played 2 ODIs. So, again, I don't know if they give him stick around the family table that, hands up who played a test match kind of thing. But then there are the Tancred brothers, who I didn't know much about before this. Bernard, Vincent and Lewis, who had an age gap, who all played for South Africa in between the 1880s and the 1910s, across quite a long period. So there was a long gap between Bernard, who was the oldest, and then the next 2 of about 10 to 12 years. And Vikram said Stardust. He said you could sprinkle some Stardust to make compelling stories. This is more like star-crossed, I think, these brothers. There's a fair bit that goes on in these stories involving ill fate. So Bernard, who's the oldest, played 2 tests, died at 46 after a failed operation while extremely sick. Vincent, who's the middle brother, played 1 test. He died 2.5 years after Bernard, but much younger. He shot himself, and he was probably a month short of his 29th birthday. There are some inaccurate reports about age, or some conflicting reports, but I think that seems like the most accurate age. He would have been 28 and 11 months when he died. And then Lewis, the youngest, who was a year or so, maybe 18 months younger than the middle brother, he would have been 27 when his middle brother died. He had the best run in cricket and in life. He'd already played 3 tests at that point. He went on to play 11 more, so 14 in total. He lived to 57, which compared to his brothers was an okay age. He perhaps luckily didn't live long enough to see his son die at 34 in a plane crash. So there was a lot of grim sort of luck that happened to this family once you go back through and read their stories. And all of them had sort of moments of distinction in terms of the things that we are interested in story time. So Bernard played in South Africa's very first test in 1889 and in the second test. So you're talking about Tom Kendall and the first 2 test matches ever. These are the first 2 for South Africa that he played in. Vincent, the middle brother, played South Africa's third test, which was 1892, which is the same test where the 3 Hearn brothers play. So you've got one of the 3 Tancred brothers playing in the same test as the 3 Hearn brothers, where your triple brothers overlap in that sense. And then Lewis, well, I don't know if he's Louis or Lewis, but I'm going to go with Lewis. Lewis captained, or partially captained, the Tri-Series in 1912, which is one that we talk about all the time, the triangular test series between South Africa and England. So if I start with Bernard, you remember a few weeks ago we were talking about there was always an impulse for wisdom to say that somebody was the W.G. Grace of somewhere.
Of course. Yeah.
Wherever it was, the W.G. Grace of Vanuatu. And we talked about that in relation to Herbert Dorning, who was the W.G. Grace of Argentina. But then when we looked into him, we found that he pretty much was the W.G. Grace of Argentina. The Herbert Dorning story is extraordinary. If you want to go back a few weeks, if you missed that one, it's well worth a listen, I think. But can't quite stack it up the same way for Bernard. So the bulk of information from scorecards doesn't really exist. He played 11 first-class games on the record with 1 century and 8 wickets. So that doesn't really scream W.G. Grace to me. If you look at all of the miscellaneous games in a domestic setting, that still only adds up to 40 matches, 2 centuries, 30 wickets. Apparently he was an absolute monster in club cricket, but I wasn't able to do the level of research to find those kind of scores if indeed they exist. So if anybody has a copy of the book, the Association of Cricket Statisticians published a book about the 3 brothers. Let me know what he did in club cricket if indeed it's worth reporting. I'm happy to follow up on that. But his 1 first-class 100 was the first century in the Currie Cup. And before that, he'd played his 2 test matches where he's pretty much the only resistance. He's the opener. They're getting thoroughly beaten. He top scores in 3 of the 4 innings, both times in the first test, making 29. And then his 3rd innings, he makes 26 not out and carries his bat as they get done for 40-odd. So he's the first player to ever carry the bat.
I was going to say, must be one of the lowest scores to carry a bat.
The lowest still, I think,
still lowest,
comfortably
right?
in test cricket. Yeah, so not in first-class cricket, but in test cricket it is. So he was able to provide something when nobody else could. Basically, Johnny Briggs, who we mentioned earlier, was ripping them up, took 15 wickets in that second test when Bernard Tancred carried his bat. So there's an interesting quirk here, Adam. If you look at the first test, of course, inevitably, there are 11 debuts listed for South Africa. And the different kinds of scorecards you can look at from different providers will list these debuts. But if you go and look at a Cricinfo page, it gives you the flags next to the player's name to show what country they're from. So on Cricinfo, there are 12 South African debuts in their first test match because one of them is Frank Hearn, who's playing that match for England because he hasn't switched to South Africa yet. Right. But because he played more tests for South Africa in the end than he played for England, his flag is South African.
Love it.
So that's confusing if you look it up.
So that's how they make the distinction. It's who you
must
played
be
more for. No.
He played 4 for South Africa and 2 for England. So he comes to England for this tour, plays 2 tests for England, stays in South Africa, and 3 years later he's representing South Africa when England next come and goes on to play 4 tests there. So that's my assumption that it's done on how many he played for which one. So that's 1892. That's a one-off test when Frank Hearn and his 2 brothers, Alec and Jack, are playing. There are also 2 other country-changing players for England in that test. JJ Ferris and Billy Murdoch play their first tests for England in that 1892 Cape Town adventure. So Bernard it's assumed that he will play a lot more for South Africa. He's seen as the best bat in the country, but he's never available after that. So he misses a couple of England tours, one with business stuff. 1902, he's serving in the Boer War, so can't go to England that year. He plays a tour match when England visit in 1899, but he, again, can't play the tests because of work. So instead, the player who gets picked for the first test in that series is his brother, Vincent, who also has not much of a career on record, only 7 first-class matches recorded, did make a 50-on first-class debut. He opens the batting like his brother in the test match, does a bit, makes 18 in a useful-ish opening partnership. The other opener goes on to 86. They take a big lead. They should win. They've got 130-ish to chase. He's out cheaply. They're bowled out for 99. They've lost the test they should have won. And in the disappointment and recriminations, like we might be having in Australia in the last few days, Vincent is discarded, and that's his only test. So he serves in the 1899 version of the Boer War, or whatever. The distinctions get a bit muddy for me with these conflicts, but he's involved in the conflict.
The first Boer War, the second Boer War, and then the Boer Wars, plural, when being described as, because they were in such close proximity to each other.
Right, exactly. It all gets a bit scrambled. And again, he's supposedly a gun local player, but he gets 1 game against the touring Australians in 1902 and doesn't make any runs, so he's not picked for the tests, and then he's left off a tour to England that turns out to be a non-test tour in 1904, but it's a big England tour. They play all the counties and whatnot. But his younger brother, Lewis, is picked against Australia, makes 97 on debut, so close to the ton on debut club. And he's caught off the bowling of Victor Trumper, which is an odd one. Trumper bowling seam up, which he didn't do that often in Test cricket. So Lewis is picked on this 1904 England trip, this non-Test trip, and it's during this tour that he gets the news of Vincent's suicide. There's speculation in the historical reporting that it was partly to do with not being picked on that tour, that it caused Vincent to go into a depression, or that it aggravated depression that he already had, which, I guess in terms of how we understand it now would seem more likely that it might have been a family disposition towards depression, and that this set off an episode. It's quite a harrowing story, so I'm not going to go through the details, but basically he after a night out, he shot himself. He didn't die immediately, and the older brother Bernard was the one who found him injured, and he died some hours later from his injuries. So that's July 7th. The same day in England, Lewis, the youngest brother, makes 99 against Hampshire. South Africa win. It's a sort of day of celebration. And I'm not exactly sure about telegraph timings and things in that era, but presumably the news would take some days to get to England about what had happened. So they play Somerset just after that. He makes 73. And then I would assume it's during a match about a week later when the news comes through. It's July 14th. They play in England 11 at Lord's. And Lewis makes 0 and 2 opening the batting, and then takes a break from the tour for a couple of weeks. So presumably gets the news during that match, or before or after, or around that day anyway, and decides to skip a few of the games. But he's back 2 weeks later, makes a few runs against Yorkshire, and then next start makes 100 against Leicestershire, who they beat, makes 100 against Notts, who they beat, has a couple of good red ink scores, including one in a hefty enough run chase to beat the MCC by 10 wickets, and then makes 100 against Yorkshire. So he has this flourishing end to the tour, which is described as being in tribute to his brother, who he's just got the news of his death. As soon as he gets home, first innings on South African soil, makes 100 in the Currie Cup, or a domestic match. I'm not sure if it was a Currie Cup game, but first innings back as well. So he goes on to play in South Africa's first Test win in 1906 when they beat England. If that's a game that rings a bell?
Yeah, only that it was a reference point this week. When talking about landmark South African moments, that it took them a while, not as long as it did others, but 1906 was something that Daniel and I at different points, I thought it came up on the podcast, but maybe it didn't. That win as being a moment in time, and not to draw too many parallels between that and what happened a few days ago, but when we chart the major moments or the course of South African cricket history, there's definitely a place there for 1906.
Well, Lewis Tancred, he doesn't make any runs in that first win, but he does a couple of games later in their second Test win. In the third innings, he makes 73 opening the batting to help lay a foundation to set a big target. And they go on to win that game. He only plays one Test in England in 1907 because he's sick and he doesn't actually want a tour, but they basically make him tour. Right. He's only fit to play one Test. He makes a pair. So he's probably not fit really. He comes back for the Tri-Series. South Africa struggle. He ends up captaining some of those games, makes another pair at the Oval, but does make a few 30s on a tour where not many players are making many runs. So his last Test is Joburg 1913, ends his career down the order, sort of lower middle order, and makes a few runs while Sid Barnes is ripping them up. But he tries to sign up for World War I, but he gets discharged as unfit. So that's interesting. Again, there might be more in the book as to whether that was mental illness or physical illness, because he apparently goes on to struggle with depression a lot after the war and after his career is done. So he packs it in 1920. He plays the last couple of first-class games, makes a 50 against an AIF force, an Australian military team, which is first class, plays one more domestic game for Transvaal for his team, and then gives it away. So he's the one with a substantial career on paper, 130 first-class matches, 11 tons, but apparently really struggles in those years afterwards with a sense of meaning and the lack of excitement and attention that he used to have. I couldn't find his cause of death, but it is at least at a semi-reasonable age. He's had a couple of kids. He's had some consolation after losing both of his brothers within 2.5 years. Earlier in his career, most of his career, his productive Test career comes after their deaths. So there's, I suppose he's able to push on to some extent. 642 is the total Test runs that the family made. That was our Nerd Pledge number. Lewis, 530 of them. Bernard, 87. Vincent, 25. And that is what I could find. Not exactly Stardust, maybe Star-Crossed. The Tancred brothers for Vikram Ravi.
Yeah, some pretty grim stuff there. Thanks, Vikram, though. And yeah, you're right. Sometimes it's the stories that it doesn't always need to be it would be disingenuous to only tell the great stories and the happy stories when doing a program like this. So there we go. My last number today, or my second number today, which will be the last number of the show, is Chris Unwin, who's a regular pledger of ours. 366 is his number this time. Geoff, I can say with some certainty this will be a Lancashire number. And I actually weirdly knew this before I even looked at the clues or anything. There ended up not really being a clue, but I knew straight away what this was going to be. So in the past, for Chris, we've done answers about Stephen Croft. We've done one about Glenn Chappell. We did one about the Lord's final when they beat Essex, I think, from memory as well. But yeah, this 366 in Lancashire will become obvious in a moment. Unfortunately, it can't be Cap 366, which was Dick Spooner from an England Test perspective, but he's from Warwickshire, so that's not going to happen. Yeah, it ain't going to happen. 366 is going to have to be Neil Fairbrother's epic innings in 1990.
Of course.
Bit of a Lancashire legend there.
Now,
I think we've basically done this before, so I'm going to use this as a vehicle to talk about something else.
Maybe we even did it for Chris before. This might be a bookkeeping error. Chris couldn't remember. Chris was like, because it had been a while since this number came up, and we were in contact to say, do you have a number in mind? And he said, well, it's going to be Lancashire because it always is, but I'm not sure. But maybe we entered it twice, and one of them was 3 years ago and one of them was now. I don't know. Someone can look at the archive, but I'm sure you've got a different spin.
Yeah, well, I do. I thought that it may well be that I've done Neil Fairbrother's 366 on commentary somewhere as well. I just don't remember. So it's reached the point we've made so many of these where I'm not quite
I have
sure
a vague memory of
where I've told my stories. But no, or I've prepped it for comms when doing a game at a Lancashire Surrey game. It's plausible. Anyway. To recap, what I actually want to do is talk about 1990 more than the innings itself, the early part of 1990 specifically. So, what's going on here? New decade, new Germany, New England, that World Cup in Italy with Lineker and Gascoigne and all the rest. And having gone so close to have made the final, only to have been denied, and in sort of in footballing terms, in tragic circumstances, in the shootout, one of the myriad shootouts that England lost. It was Stuart Pearce who missed the penalty. I think it was. Anyway, but it's also like the year after 1989, which is far more relevant to what happens in the season of 1990. There are some good things that happen in the winter of 89-90 for England cricket. There's the coverage of an overseas test series in the Caribbean, which is a mighty one at that. The first time that there's a private provider involved in what B-Sky B as it was then. The debuts of Alex Stewart and Nasser Hussain, who have both gone to have enormous careers for England. But when 1990 rolls around, it becomes a record-breaking season for, I was going to say all the wrong reasons. Some argue for good reason. I'll explain as we go. So there were 428 centuries made in 1990. That broke the record of 414 back in 1928. 32 of those centuries came in the first two rounds. Now, I'm leaning a little bit here on a great piece that Joey Harmon wrote in the to mark 30 years of this in Wisden Cricket Monthly in 2020. And I went on to spend some time jumping into this old thing on my shelf, the 1991 Wisden Cricketers Almanac, which was helpful with a couple of bits and pieces as well. But yeah, it was the hottest May in the 20th century. So the start of the season in England was hot and it was dry. Jonathan Agnew described it as the summer from hell, and it basically ended his career with Leicestershire. I know he went on to famously come back and play a white ball final at Lord's a couple of years on from that. But broadly speaking, this was the year as a fast bowler. He's like, there will be no more. Now, there's the wider context here is I mentioned 89 and England getting rolled over quite comprehensively by Australia. It was also the era when they were moving to 4-day cricket. So in 1988 to 1993, there was a transition from 3-day cricket to 4-day cricket. It didn't happen as one. It progressively became more and more 4-day stuff until it was thoroughly bedded in, which meant this was the era when local ground staff, curators as we would call them in Australia, groundsmen as they are known over here, wanted to make sure their pitches would go the distance. Because until this point, 3-day cricket, there was a sense that, well, for a long time you had to declare on the first day, but there was a sense of keeping the game open, opening it up to results, which meant providing plenty of life. And Angus Fraser's quoted in that Joe Harmon piece, referring to 1989, and there was this desire to want to see flatter pitches, but also less favourable cricket balls. So the readers that used to be used, and I don't really know how to what this means precisely. I couldn't I don't know whether even looking at the cricket ball in my hand right now that I could explain what this means, but I'll say it anyway. Readers in the 1990 season were asked to make a 9-strand ball. The previous year in 1989, it was a 15-strand ball. I'm not sure what you're counting as strands, if you know what I mean. There must be something to do with...
Must be the thickness of the twine.
Seam. Yeah, something like that.
The thickness of the string that they're using, if you're using a thicker string to stitch it, or thicker thread, then it's going to be more pronounced as it's sort of repeated over and over as it stitches the ball together.
Yeah, something like that.
Be a more prominent seam.
Well, the seam was lowered by, on average, 22%. So it wasn't just the readers. I always have heard this told as the story of readers, but Dukes were also part of this, according to the reporting in the Wisden Cricketers Almanac from Jack Bannister, who, coincidentally, I mentioned earlier, I was watching a highlights package late last night of South Africa beating England in 1994. It was Jack Bannister voicing that as well. But he wrote the piece in the Almanac, which went through all of this. It was called Don't Blame the Ball. Yeah, I recognise a lot of these conversations and debates as being quite modern as well, because the premise was this. They felt that in 1989, part of the reason why England's batting just wasn't up to scratch, and indeed their bowling wasn't up to scratch, is that county cricketers were arriving at the top table and they were far too conditioned to the balance being out of kilter. Ball dominating bat in a way that got batters into bad habits and provided bowlers with the belief that it would just come if they landed the ball vaguely in the right spot for long enough, a ball would do something and that would be enough. And they wanted to create a culture that inverted that in much the same way that Rob Key has spoken about the Duke's ball and early season conditions here in England. It's partly why we had 2 Kookaburra rounds to start April in 2024. And what do you know, that was a record-breaking run as well. I worked it out with the aforementioned Andrew Sampson. I'm like, Samo, have there ever been this many scores of 150 plus in a round of county cricket? And there hadn't been. The second round last year, the second Kookaburra round,
individual scores,
which was less rain affected, the most individual scores above 150 in a single round. So it was the same energy around the conversation around making sure, or wanting to make sure, that bowlers had to work harder for their wickets. And so it played out in sort of rather stunning fashion. You could argue there was a bit of an overcorrection here. So whilst in the modern era, it was a bit of a dismissive Darren Stevens, he's the archetypal, 70 mile an hour, to an extent Tim Murtagh, although both were extremely skilled bowlers. It was more a conversation around what you can do when conditions are so heavily skewed in your favour, which isn't to say that I haven't been at county games when it has been out of balance. That season I did at Lords in 2021, where balls were just doing bits all day long and it felt like it was nigh on impossible for a batting team to get a toe hold in. You don't want that either. But you go back to 1990, the result was 7 scores above 600, 2 above 700, and then Lancashire's 863 at the Oval, where Neil Fairbrother's 366 came. They were so worried up in the old hand-reeled scoreboard that they went and they went searching for how they could make it a 4-figure score. They were almost convinced it was going to be a score above 1,000 in the county championship, which was virtually unheard of. Well, it was unheard of in first-class cricket, other than when we've seen it happen a couple of times in Australia back in the 1920s and 1930s.
And in India a couple of times.
And India as well, that's right. So, so 38 bowlers averaged under 26 in 1989. 38 bowlers went under 26. A year later, only 5 bowlers did, and they were all overseas. Malcolm Marshall, Ian Bishop, Curtly Ambrose, Waka Yunus, and Ole Mortensen. So, well, acknowledging the Great Dane,
a natural
was
club.
Essentially, it was essentially an English bowler by that point. But still, it was only the absolute creme de la creme. It isn't. Well, I'll just keep going through the numbers here. So the first class stats are absolutely ridiculous. Graham Gooch made over 2,700 runs with 12 centuries and 102. That'll include a glut of runs for England as well. That was his extraordinary summer where he made his 100, but still point stands. Jimmy Cook, the South African who played for so long in England, averaged 77 with 9 tons. Hugh Morris at Glamorgan, 10 tons. Chris Broad, 9 tons. Graham Hick, 8 centuries, averaging 90. Desmond Haynes averaged 70 with 8 centuries. Like, you go through the top 10 for averages and runs. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10 batters got above 2,000, and 3 others were above 1,900, including Mike Atherton, who averaged 72 and made 7 centuries, and a bunch of that also for England. But point stands is that these batters absolutely carved up. Mark Waugh, 8 centuries, averaging 77 over at Essex. So it was the year of years for batters. Then there was a correction. In 1991, there was a 26% dip. So there was an evolution quickly. I'm not sure. And they didn't change the ball, at least in that almanac piece. They were going to keep the ball as was. But there was a correction when you combine a very hot early parts of the season, very flat pitches that were being, they were trying to make them last 4 days, and very favourable balls for batters.
Right.
Anyone quoted in these stories, Alan Butcher said that he played first-class cricket for nearly 20 years and said it was never easier to score runs than it was in 1990. So, and back to the Fairbrother innings, 311 came in one day, and then he went on to add those further runs the next day. It was the second highest score in first-class cricket for Lancashire. The context is that Surrey made 707 for 9 firsts, though. So they were entitled to bat for a couple of days, the visitors having already been in the field for so long. So Fairbrother batted for 500 minutes. He went at a decent clip, 407 balls. Both teams were scoring at about 4 and over. So they weren't, they were going for it to an extent. But they ended up mid-table in the end. Lancashire, Middlesex won the comp over Essex. Very quickly on Middlesex, I was corresponding with Mike Selvey last night, the great Mike Selvey, who for a long time was the standard bearer at Middlesex and went on to become the president there. He played his first game yesterday for a very long time. He's in his mid-70s now, Selvey. Played with his son Josh for Olney Town in the Sunday comp because it was Father's Day here. And Selv is still a massive presence at that club. I played in their 150th anniversary game for MCC a couple of weeks ago. So g'day to Selv, who still love to talk to and love hearing his views on the game. And great that he was able to still play in his mid-70s with his son Josh, who still plays first-team cricket there at Olney Town as well. So that was a nice thing yesterday, which I wanted to mention on the show today. Neil Fairbrother, of course, we know that he was given the names Neil Harvey as his first 2 names. His mum's favourite cricketer was Neil Harvey, so he ended up Neil Harvey Fairbrother, known as Harv around the cricketing world. He ended up making 20,000 first-class runs in that wonderful era for him. He made 47 first-class hundreds, 10 test matches across 6 years, which didn't really work out, 75 one-dayers across 12 years, which did. He averaged 40 for England, including the World Cup final of 1992, and massive player agent thereafter, famously with Flintoff in his pomp, his old Lancashire teammate, but many others as well who've been under the wing of Neil Fairbrother over the years. And that is the story of the 1990 season, to an extent the story of the 366, and how history, it may not repeat, but as they say, it does rhyme in the conversation that's now had around the Kookaburra ball and trying to even up the balance between bat and ball, even though I would argue that the balance with the Duke's ball is pretty bloody good in the championship at the moment. And that's all for Chris Unwin.
Very good. And that's all for Storytime. We are in and out in under an hour because we didn't quite have time to pull together more than that over after such a busy weekend at the WTC. But there will be more Storytime coming up in the weeks ahead. There'll be daily shows from the England-India tests and from the Australia-West Indies tests, West Indies-Australia, if we do the order correctly. There'll be a weekly show on Wednesday probably before all of that gets going. And on we go into the busiest part of the middle section of our year.
Buy your tickets for the 18th of August at Wormsley. They are going to be the hottest ticket in town. The final word 11 against the Zero Ducks 11. Every pound raised that day will be for our dear friends at the Lord's Taverners, who we recently hit that target for. So we're going to keep on keeping on for them. But yeah, get involved. Buy a ticket in the show notes. Book your day off work. So many of our people are going to be there, and most of whom are patrons of ours as well. So patreon.com/the final word. If you want to be part of our wider community, so great to see so many of our patrons on Friday night, many of whom have become close friends of mine over the years and are here in London, and it's a special thing. And that can be part of your life as well. The Discord channel, the wider world, the story time episodes that have been going since, 2019. It's all part of the bigger picture of the final word. You're right. Let's get out of here. This has been Storytime 232. We'll catch you with the weekly show in about a day and a bit from now.
See you later.